Good evening friends, welcome you all to Study IQ English. Students, in today's video, we're going to discuss is RTE Act, that is Right to Education Act, also applicable on minority educational institutions. Students, you must have read about Article 30. You must have read that Article 30 of the Indian Constitution, it provides certain specific rights to the minorities. Minorities can either be religious or linguistic. If a minority, it is considered to be a minority on the basis of its religion, it is considered to be a religious minority. And if a minority is considered minority on the basis of the language its speakers speak, it is called as linguistic minority. Students, Article 30 of the Constitution provides certain educational rights to both religious and linguistic minorities. It specifically states that in India, religious as well as linguistic minorities, they have the right to establish as well as administer educational institutions of their own. Now students, why Article 30 of the Constitution provides these specific rights to the minorities? Students, the Constitution recognizes that minorities, they need to protect and safeguard their culture, their religion, their language, their script and other features distinctive to them. So now, if a minority has to safeguard its religion or its language or custom, now it is important that such practices or such belief system shall be transmitted to the new generations. How can it be done? It can be done through education. And for effectively imparting education, a minority or any community requires educational institutions. So that's why Article 30 provides special rights to linguistic as well as religious minorities that allows them to either establish and also operate or run or administer educational institutions. And secondly, the law also provides that these minority education institutions, they shall not be discriminated by the state in terms of providing them aid. Now students, the question before the court now is, and the court, the Supreme Court of India has referred this question to a larger bench for reconsideration. Now the question came up before the court, is RTE Act also applicable on such minority educational institutions? Now students, all of us know in 2002, the Parliament amended the Constitution by 86th Amendment and inserted Article 21A. Article 21A specifically provided right to education, but to children from age group 6 to 14 years. Now specifically, before 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, in India, we do not have any fundamental right by the name of right to education. That means right to education was not considered to be a fundamental right before 86th Amendment, Constitutional Amendment. Students, all of us know that Supreme Court has interpreted Article 21 in such a manner to include all these facilities and amenities of life that make a life worthwhile. The Supreme Court in multiple cases has also stated that though the fundamental rights itself does not include a right to education, but Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, it can be interpreted in such a manner so as to include right to education in it. The students, specifically after 86th Constitutional Amendment Act 2002, right to education was made a fundamental right, but only for the students from 6 to 14 years of age group. Now students, the government had certain limitations, especially budgetary limitation. So the government cannot provide right to education to every citizen irrespective of their age, because that would be too much of a burden on the government. So that's why the government has ensured at least every children or every child shall be provided with elementary education up to the class of 8th or up to the 8th class. So students, now under RTE Act, every child from 6 to 14 years of age, he has the right to seek education from the government, and it is the obligation of the government to provide every child from 6 to 14 years of age education at least up to elementary level. Now RTE Act that was enacted in 2009, it provides a right based approach. That means every child from 6 to 14 years of age has a right. It can ask the government to provide him education till elementary level, and the government is also obligated under RTE Act to provide education to the students by establishing educational institutions till elementary education, and the government is obligated to establish schools within 3 kilometers of radius of every neighborhood. Now students, the question here is, when RTE Act is providing right to education to specific age group, then RTE Act has also put obligations on educational institutions, even private educational institutions. But Article 30 of the Constitution, it allows the religious minorities to establish educational institutions. Now there is a little bit of conflict. On one hand, RTE Act, it is imposing obligation on even private education institutions that are not receiving any aid from the government. On the other hand, Article 30, it is providing freedom to education institutions run by minority to run in an autonomous manner. So the question here is RTE Act not in conflict with Article 30 of the Constitution? Because Article 30 imparts autonomy to educational institutions run by minorities, linguistic and religious, whereas on the other hand, section 12 of the RTE Act, it puts obligations on private education institutions. So obviously this private education institutions will also include education institutions run by minorities. So there is a conflict. Now I will just give you a brief overview. See, 86 Constitutional Amendment Act 2002 inserted Article 21A. Article 21A provided that every child from 6 to 14 years of age group, he has the right to receive elementary and compulsory education. And in pursuance of Article 21A, the Parliament in 2009 enacted Right to Education Act. In which a right-based approach was incorporated, and every child from 6 to 14 years of age has a right to seek education from the government till 14 years of age. And there were certain obligations that were put on the government, whether state or central or local authorities, as well as on educational institutions. Now see, now the question is section 12 of RTE Act. Section 12 of RTE Act, it is important, so we have to understand that. Now RTE Act specifically states any school that is run by the government, that means established and operated by the government, whether central or state, it has to provide free and compulsory education to every child from 6 to 14 years of age who is admitted in the school. So that means school cannot charge, or the government cannot charge any fee from such students. One. Secondly, those schools, those are run by private individuals or entities, but who are receiving fund from the state, who are receiving economic help or aid from the state. Now these institutions, as they are receiving fund from the state, as they are receiving money from the state, so they have to contribute to the education. How? They have to provide or reserve at least that much of seats in proportion to the money that they are receiving. For example, if a school is spending 1 crore rupees per year in education and it is getting 50%, that means 50 lakh from the government as financial aid. Now it has to reserve 50% of its seats, 50% of its seats for the children belonging to the weaker section of society, economically weaker section of the society. That means the school cannot charge any fee from the children from economically weaker sections or children from the parents of economically weaker sections. Thirdly, now the question here is this: unaided schools, that means private schools that are not at all receiving any financial aid from the government. So private schools that are not at all receiving any financial aid from the government, they are also obligated. How? They have to reserve 25% of the seats till class 8th for the children belonging to weaker sections, economically weaker section. That means suppose I am running a school and from 1st till 8th, in every class I have to reserve 25% of the total seats, in which I will not charge any fee for the students belonging to economically weaker section, so that this economically weaker section students, they can also gain the benefit of education. Now it is the obligation on even private education institution, as well as obligations on schools, though private, but are receiving funds from the state, financial aid from the state. Now going on to Article 29 and 30. I told you Article 30 specifically provides rights to education, to religious and linguistic minority. It says all minorities, whether religious or linguistic, they have the right to establish and administer education institutions of their choice. One. And RTE Act specifically states that RTE Act will not be applicable specifically on madrasas, Vedic Pathshalas and educational institutions imparting religious institution. Now it is specifically saying that any institution, though it is educational, but it is only imparting religious education. So that's why, because the institution is only imparting religious education, it is not imparting any secular education. That's why there is no purpose of imposing RTE Act on this particular institution. So that's why such institutions, they are out of ambit of RTE. Now students, try to understand. Section 5 of RTE Act, it is taking out madrasas, Vedic pathshalas and education institution imparting only religious education out of its ambit. But there are certain minority education institutions that are established by religious or linguistic minorities, but they are not only providing religious education, they are also providing secular education. So that means those minority institutions, they are not out of the ambit of RTE as per section 5. Are you getting the point? Section 5, I am again reiterating, section 5 is saying that madrasas, Vedic pathshala or institution imparting religious education, they will not fall within the ambit of RTE. That means they do not have any obligation that is imposed on education institution. But minority education institution established under Article 30, they can also impart secular education. So if they are imparting secular education, that means they are within the ambit of RTE. That means all the obligations that are on the private education institutions, they will also apply on these minority educational institutions. Now the question is, we have a very important case, Pramati Educational and Cultural Trust versus Union of India 2014. In this case, a point was raised. Point was raised from the side of, or on behalf of, minority educational institutions established under Article 30 of the Constitution. This institution said, Article 30 on one hand gave us autonomy to run educational institutions, and whereas Section 12 of RTE Act, it is imposing obligation to reserve 25% of seats for students belonging to weaker section of society. So section 12, it is directly going against Article 30. Article 30 is giving us autonomy to run education institution. That means we can run or operate or administer our educational institutions according to our choice, according to our norms. Whereas section 12 is imposing an obligation that you have to anyway provide 25% of reserved seats to students of economically weaker section. So that means this section 12 of RTE Act, it is interfering in our autonomy to run education institution. Court said yes. In this particular case. In Pramati case, court said yes. This section 12 of RTE Act, it is somehow interfering in the autonomy of minority education institutions to run and administer their education institutions. So that's why minority education institutions, they are not within the ambit of RTE. They are not within the ambit of RTE. So this was a judgment that was given by Pramati Educational and Cultural Trust versus Union of India case in 2014. So one thing, till 2014, until this judgment was clear that minority educational institutions, any education institution that is established by either religious or linguistic minority, they will not fall within the ambit of RTE. That means any obligation that will be imposed on any private educational school or a school receiving financial aid from the government, such obligation will not be imposed on minority education institutions. For example, suppose I am a Sikh. If I am running education institutions for minority, so I do not have to reserve 25% of the seats for children belonging to economically weaker sections. So this was the crux of this judgment. Now a case has come before a court of law, especially the Supreme Court. Justice Dipankar Datta specifically said that we have to review this exemption, this blanket exemption that is given to the minority educational institutions. They said minority educational institutions, they are given blanket exemption from the application of RTE. That means they do not have to incur any obligations that are imposed on educational institutions under RTE. So that's why somehow it is obstructing universal education. It is acting as an impediment to universal education. RTE Act envisaged universal education. That means any school, every school has to contribute in providing education to the society. How can a minority educational school be left out of the ambit of RTE? So that's why the court referred the matter to a larger bench. Whether we need reconsideration of or review of this judgment, Pramati Educational and Cultural Trust judgment. The Supreme Court has referred the matter to a larger bench. Now we have to see what would be the judgment. So obviously there would be arguments on the both sides, from the sides of both the parties, and finally we'll see whether the Supreme Court will like to bring art education institutions, minority education institutions within the ambit of RTE or not. And once if a minority education institutions comes within the ambit of RTE, it has to incur all the obligations that education institutions have to incur. So that means even a unaided minority education institution, it has to reserve 25% of its total seats for the children of economically weaker sections. So students, I'll end up the video here only. I hope you were able to understand RTE and its interface with Article 30 of the Constitution. So students, will meet in a new video. We'll discuss some topic which is of relevance or which is of constitutional relevance, which is related to law or constitution, and we'll like to discuss it and expound different facets of this particular topic. So students, we'll meet with a new video. Till then, please take care of yourself. Please stay dedicated towards achieving your goals. Stay happy and stay blessed. Jai Hind.